Yeah, so you were saying
When did you lose me?
somewhere across the Atlantic. It was it was mid sentence, and Justin and I were like, "What? What happened?" So
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. The Web Platform Podcast is a proud O'Reilly media partner. As such, one of the benefits we provide our listeners, that's you, are special discounts such as 50% off of ebooks and 40% off of printed materials. So this includes but is not limited to books on web technologies, as well as other technologies you may be using. So your discount code is all caps PCBW. That's PCBW, all in caps. So head over to O'Reilly.com, that's OREILLY.com, right now to get all your favorite tech books at much lower prices.
welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is Eric Isaacson, and on our panel today we also have Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And I have shaven this time. I got some liquid latex from Halloween on my beard, and now I've had to shave it, unfortunately. I just thought I'd share that with all of you.
Halloween is rough.
Halloween is rough sometimes. But we have a pimp here today from Halloween, Mr. Oren Rubin.
Hi, guys.
Oren's a GDE and a bit of a front-end expert on testing, as well as testing for the back-end too. But he's going to talk to us today about a few things. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're going to be talking about?
Sure. I've been in tech for 20 years, mostly coding. I started with backend actually, not just coding. Compilers, distributed computing, and the last 8 years moved to doing a lot of front end. And I was a unit test advocate for a few years, and I've moved on doing more and more end-to-end testing. And now I'm even have a company that does helps developers writing end-to-end tests. It's Testing.io. So I'm the CEO there.
Whoa, we got a big shot here. That's awesome. So that's, I used to do a lot of testing when I worked on Ruby on Rails, because it was sort of like ingrained into the processes for that. And as I've moved on to other companies that aren't using Rails, we use JavaScript testing over there with Jasmine and some other tools. But I found that there's this whole outside of the Rails community, the Ruby on Rails community, there's not as much focus on the testing parts of this, and so I thought it was important that we do another. We did a talk with we did a talk about like last year on testing in general, and we focused a little on JavaScript. But I'm talking about in this case, this is all front end focused, so we won't be talking too much about testing your Node apps and things like that, but testing in general, there is an importance that's emphasized in communities that embrace this. So why would developers want to test or want to shift to some sort of testing practices like TDD or BDD or anything like that?
So I guess it all starts with people want to do Agile. One of the key features of Agile is you want to get to the market as any feature that you have, you want to get it out there as soon as possible. But I'm not talking just about the business side. I'm talking about the developers who, if you finish a bunch of code that does a feature, you want to have everything related to it right now, not send it to the QA that will actually go over it in a month or two. You remember, like a decade ago, it was you released a product or a feature every 6 months. So you get something. Oh, you had something here that you forgot. That was 6 months ago. So now it's great because you want to release the entire feature, or the entire loop, within a week or two, and you even have cases when you want to fix a bug and you want to change a few lines and ship it in a matter of minutes or hours. And you can't have that without test automation. And simply because whatever you change can affect so many things that you don't have a month for testing. You have now a few hours. You want to check everything in 30 minutes and test everything and ship it. So I guess it all boils down to you want to be continuous deployment and ship a product in an hour.
Yeah, we had a lot of things that you talked about in there, like continuous deployment. One of the things that really resonated for me when you were talking there was that QA. So QA, quality assurance, they're going to come at testing code at a very, very different angle than developers. And a lot of companies, don't really buy into the whole QA thing. They think developers should test their own stuff. Chances are, if we test our own stuff, we're going to miss half of the things that a QA would test, at least, because we're approaching it from, we know what the code does. We have total context in our own little minds. We have tunnel vision. So we're going to make mistakes. And there's this belief that, well, if we have QA, that's extra overhead, and we should just pay developers to check their own code. How do you feel about the roles of testing across product teams and services teams?
So I guess you have to have a bit of both. What I mean is that developers do know not just how to write tests, they know how to automate them. This is what they do best. They know how to write code. It doesn't mean, as you said, there's two things when you're talking about test automation. One thing is what exactly to test, and the second thing is how to automate it. And as we go to the how to automate, this is what developers do best. They know how to automate. They know how to write reusable code, and this is something they excel at. And as you said, there's some times where you have this QA has this amazing knowledge base of years of experience of finding bugs. Over the years, I see that developers are getting more and more oriented about a QA. They give a damn. That's a nice thing. If you are in charge of your testing, the next part is you have to make sure it works. You have to when you say it's come on, it's ready, you take responsibility. And this is the part I love. Developers taking responsibility of their code and not just shipping it with minimal testing. They're trying to see, okay, let's see how robust my code is. Oh, it's great. So I guess we should maybe even split between end-to-end testing and unit testing, because unit testing helps you with not just with testing, and it's not just about test coverage, and which we'll probably talk in a second. It's another reuse of your code. You have another program right now that uses your classes and invokes methods, so it helps you write more your code to be more reusable. It's funny, but I see that people running unit testing, you see better code. There's a synergy between those. The correlation is very, very high, and it's not just because the code is robust. I mean, you write it better.
You spoke about the value of QA. Testing the quality is much higher, and the reasons why. And I think we lost you somewhere in there.
So I was going that it also depends on the type of testing. You have unit tests and you have end-to-end testing, whereas there's a huge difference where unit tests also helps you a lot in writing better code. So unit testing. So there's a big difference between unit testing and end-to-end. As we said, unit testing, the metrics are different usually. Maybe they shouldn't, but people still see it, and we should probably go through a bit. So maybe we should describe just a bit about the differences between unit test and integration test and end-to-end testing. So unit test, should it be just a code? Should it be a code of a component? Should it be just the logic of the controller? Should it be the entire component? Is this unit test? Is this for component or integration test? It is integration of your code, your template, and usually and your CSS. Can you actually write? Can you just write unit test and that's it, and without end-to-end testing? So currently, we see that all the new frameworks give us the possibility to write unit tests. What we mean is just the logic, just the controller, without the templates, without any. We can easily mark the dependencies that we need, and we isolate everything and we test just one thing, only the unit that we want to test. And this is great because now we can reuse it again and again, and in our tests. And so the question is, what's the metrics? Should we test for coverage, for code coverage? Should we check for the method calls, the API? There's advantage for each one of them. So with unit test, should we have 100% unit code coverage? Some would say this is awesome. I have a code coverage. I know how do I improve over time because I'm improving my code coverage. And some would say, wait a second, if you're checking with code coverage, that means you're not checking with the API as a user story. What you're checking is the implementation. And as you see, usually you see when you have TDD, you even write the test before you even write the code. So you're not supposed to use code coverage as a metrics of how well are my tests.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot where a lot of places they'll do the test afterwards, and that totally gives a different value to it. It does give value, but it gives a different value. Like Abdi Grimm talked about this on Ruby Rogues in reference to Ruby, but I think it holds true for JavaScript as well, where sometimes you can also, in TDD, you can start doing a test first, make it fail, make it pass, go back and forth with all that, and then you use that as part of your design. So it becomes the way that you think about code, and you start to, it improves the value of what you're trying to do because you understand better what that API should be. Because you start off saying, well, I think this should test this, and then you'll find out as you go. So it sort of designs how you're coding.
By the way, that was a great thing I saw at Ruby on Rails and the community. I mean, writing tests was something that comes on right out of the box. Not just the technical side. The state of mind of the developers in that community was write tests. Of course, we should write tests. So, but I agree. The same thing about whether write test as outside as a user story. That's similar to both unit test and end-to-end. So as we talked about, unit test is just a bare minimum unit, and then we can get to component testing, which is actually more integration but of a specific component. Usually, if you have a front-end component, let's just say you've written a gallery, you can test that. You can test not just the code itself. You might want to test the entire component. We'll talk about visual validations in a second, probably, and their templates, and then you can have the integration test of the entire front end. And there's of course end-to-end, which means checking the entire flows of the front end, back end, databases. You start from scratch and you test the entire flow. And this is the granularity of your tests, and how much do you mock, how much is real, whether you should mock the server or not. And something that is orthogonal, which it means is how many tests do I want to run before committing my code or pushing my code or deploying my code. So this is where, when you talk about smoke testing, as smoke as in if there is smoke, there's probably fire somewhere. So you just have a few tests to make sure everything's okay, and then you commit and send it to usually there's, you have a continuous integration system that actually after every push that you make, once it's run a huge amount of sanity before sending it to everyone to review. And of course there's what you call acceptance test, which means what are the tests that I want passing before deploying a new version. So exception tests that can be either can have unit tests as well. Some say they prefer having end-to-end testing as the acceptance test because they say this is how the user perceives our application. So let's just test it as the user. If we can have not a lot of people, and me, including myself, that have 100% unit test coverage, but then the application didn't work because the integrations, there are a few things in the integration that fails. This, of course, by the way, there's everything's opinionated. There's a lot of opinions. There's one style that says you should only check unit tests and then and check the integration with other components. So that means you should never check more than more than the units. There's a great talk. You talked about it for Rainsberger for I think a decade ago. It's called integration tests are a scam, where it says you should only check with the units and their integration with other units. But since it's not that simple, and I'll give you an example why that's not that simple. By the way, CSS, can you unit test CSS? Can you isolate a CSS as a first component?
We've done it in SAS where we've isolated like a here doc, which is basically a document that's dynamically created in line, and then we've isolated like the rules there. You can test the output too, but I think for visual testing of CSS, there's tools like Huxley, which I'm not familiar with, and there's a few others out there as well.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Huxley for a second. So CSS as you said, CSS by definition is global. So of course, if you check two isolated components, once you put them both on the same page without iframes or shadow DOMs, they might interact with each other, and CSS proofs can ruin one another. The styling, and of course, you want to go to either something that checks it in static time if you can, or the best way is probably use some convention. I don't know, like even BAM, something that you know that you have. You can have if you check the component that you don't use anything else that might interfere. So Huxley. So we're talking about visual validations. So let's just say we have a calculator, and you want to test the functionality of adding 1 plus 1, the addition. So we can have that as just checking the pre-call unit test that invokes the method add, sending 1 and a 1, and see that we got a result of 2. And we can have integrate end-to-end tests, which are running the real server with I don't know, like Google has their own calculator online. If you just search on Google, write +1 + 1, it prompts gives you the Google calculator, and here you have a full component with buttons, a lot of visual things, and you want to make sure that everything is looks as it's supposed to do. So this is where visual validation comes in. You can, if you take a screenshot of that area of the calculator, it also checks. It does a couple of things. First of all, it checks functional validations. Why? So if we click 1 + 1, we should see a 2 there. So we can either check that the text, the number 2 is there, is in the DOM. That's one thing. This is functional testing. Visual validation means that you want to check that it's in the right color, in the right fonts, that all the buttons are aligned. This is visual validation. You want to check how the visual, how it looks. So visual validations can be either for a specific component or the entire page. There's an advantage and a disadvantage. So the advantage is that you can get 1,000 validations in one screenshot. One screenshot, you get all the text, everything. You, instead of having assert this DOM element has that content, assert that element has another content, you just take one screenshot. So that's an advantage. The disadvantage is that it's a bit tricky. You had a lot of toolings that help you. What the tricky part is that you can render things twice, even the same browser. And I've noticed you have things like anti-aliasing, display adapter, which were inherently non-deterministic, and you get few pixels off. You get the same. You think you see something it looks as the same. You render it, you click the refresh button, and it looks the same. But if you inspect the pixels, pixel by pixel, they've shifted in a pixelature. It's called subpixeling, and writing something very simple as comparing the two images it seems that it's not that simple because you have something that moves by a pixel and a human eye won't notice it, but if you just compare pixel by pixel, then the computer will say, oh no, that's not the same. And then people start using let's get calculations, let's get like a threshold of similarity. So what I just want to say that taking screenshots, it has to be very controlled, and as now there's more and more applications, as you mentioned, that helps you with those miscalculations or different calculations for the pixels. So what I'm suggesting is don't try this at home. You have so many tools. I think you have dozens of tools. Most of them are open source, a few commercial, and also helps you that do it in the cloud with all the different browsers and support. So it's a bit tricky, but I think it's a great way to go. The only difference is should you go and check the entire DOM, the whole end-to-end, or do you want to check a component? You can check both with visual validation. It doesn't mean that visual validation, people usually take it to end-to-end testing, but you can also check each component that you write, and if you write a gallery, you can have the visual validation for that specific gallery, like a unit test. You don't have to check the gallery inside your big page. It has hundreds of other components. Just have visual validation of that specific component. Just get it up there and test it. And of course, you'll see that you've written probably better code because you've reused the same component now in someplace else. So you probably want to write it in a more isolated way. So you can just add it in a very simple page. As I said, writing tests helps you write better code. It gives you the safety that if you change something, you'll find out what went wrong. But first of all, it helps you write better code. So we had a lot of things that we said. There's the unit test, there's the integration test, and end-to-end test, which is the granularity. There's different things to check, which is, do we want to check functional? It means the end result, the functionality of the application, the visual validation, how the user perceives it pixel-wise. You can check memory consumption or CPU. There's not many tooling right now to make it automated, but maybe in the long term you run, you'll see people trying to test frame per second. I don't see anyone currently doing that automatically because there's not enough good tooling. But there weren't any good tooling for visual validations a year or two ago. There weren't any. Now there's dozens of them, and so it's getting better and better. As for just wrapping out the visual validations, the big advantage of using it to component actually, which almost nobody uses, as apart from check, like taking a screenshot of the entire application, is let's just you have lots of tests, and all of your tests you're taking a full screenshot, which is great. But now you decide to move your logo, which is on the top left side. You want to change it, and you want to move it to the right side or change your logo. Okay, Google changed their logo. So now you have 1,000 screenshots of different tests, And now all the screenshots are different. 1,000 screenshots. Should you go one by one and now changing them? So if you checked by parts using a component screenshot for your gallery and your login page, etc., you would probably just check the logo just one time. So having a different fail, 1,000 failures, that's something that maintenance is something that people are not used to, and but now more and more there's the tools that I've mentioned, not just most of the open source don't do that. There are a few of the commercial like Percy and the Applitools that actually what they give you. Sorry for mentioning because I used to because I did that. I added this feature at Applitools. I used to work it. Sorry, so so I added the feature. So when you use, if you say for one image that is changed, it tells you the image has changed. The logo doesn't look the same as it used to be. And if you say okay, yeah, it's okay, the designer changed that. There's a new Google logo, and then you can check the other images as well. And instead of going traversing 1,000 images, you need just to approve one, and you can check that the other 999 have exactly the same div. So this is the kind of thing that usually maintenance wise is hard.
Yeah, as far as like the visual stuff too, I mean today there's a lot of mobile first development. There's a lot of responsive design, adaptive design, RESS. Not as much of the latter, but you have all these different relative units and not as much pixel design, and so you're building components that'll expand to fit in their containers and move around, and you'll have images that are maybe served differently to different browsers. Like if you have different pixel densities, for instance Retina or any of that, you'll have to adjust those screenshots for that. Do you think have you encountered any of these issues with those tools?
Yeah, and what you do is you want to have a complete set of baseline images for each test. So you want to reuse the test, so we have the same test. Usually, you still, if it doesn't you have the same flow, same user story. You want to log in, you want to press 1+1 and see that the result is 2. And but you want to do it in different resolutions and different browsers, and you want to check the results. So you want usually the expected image is you want to have different expected images for it's called baseline. The baseline images, you want to have it differently for widescreen resolution, like a desktop resolution, and differently for mobile. So we have to have different. You probably want to have different baselines. So that would be great if you write the same test and just run it on different browsers. So this is the nice thing about end-to-end testing. Usually, when you can one of the setup, usually you can reuse the same code again and again, and just with a different environment. You say run the same test. Now I want you to run it in IE, in Firefox, in Chrome, and I want to run it in Chrome in different resolutions. And now there's more and more even running on a real mobile device, and you can see how it looks over there.
What are the best tools that you've used for those type of tests?
Well, for visual validation and the baseline, once again, I'm as I used to work at Applitools, so I worked a lot
No
for
plug
years.
here.
No, yeah. So I'm just so I want you to take it. So we worked a lot of doing the automatic baseline, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of open source as well, as you said. There's Huxley, there's Wrath, there's Gizra. There's a few open source tools that helps you with the baseline of the images, and everyone's a little bit different. For example, Applitools just they deal with images. That's it. This is what they do, and you have to send them the images. For example, per CIO, what they say is, we give me the DOM, and now I can render it on different devices. When you run the test once, right? You run the test, you open a browser, and you go to some URL, and you say we type run plus run, and the DOM's been updated, and now there's a 2. Now you can take the entire DOM, and now he runs it. It puts it in different browsers, and then you can he does it for you, and it checks how it looks in different resolutions, because usually you have responsive design, and it's going to look differently. So it helps you with not doing this, running the test again and again, by running it once, and then putting the result in different browsers.
And as far as starting with TDD or any type of process with this, let's say you're at a company that they're not experienced with TDD, and product managers or project whatever you have as your business people, or even UX, they may come to you and say, well, what's the business value for this? And you could say, the higher quality, but for them, they're going to have metrics to go up and say, well, we need to change this so that developers are doing this. They've come to us and said, we want this to change. They're going to need metrics to go back and say, this will do this, or we can track this way to find out if this is really helping. Like, what do you suggest for those people to get started or to not get started?
So first of all, I've noticed that if you have someone, for example, the VP R&D that really wants it, then everything's going to be tested. It all boils down to him saying, this is how we work, period. It's just exactly like, oh, we want to use a version control and not just sending files. This is the thing. This is how you write better software. But of course, as you go with metrics, so as we mentioned at first, so code coverage is not always the best thing. It's the simplest thing to check, but it hinders you from knowing exactly if you're not testing too much the specific implementation. So the best thing, if you want to convince people, is showing them, if we have fully coverage, we can deploy something in an hour after you fix something. If you have a bug, and everyone has bugs, so many bugs. Everyone, there's not a developer that.
No, it's all the user's fault. We never have bugs.
So it depends on the number of bugs. Usually, decreases when you have testing. The number of bugs that goes to the user, it makes you look bad, and it hurts your business. Actually, it hurts you real bad, because bugs. When you think there's a app that keeps crashing, you'll never go back there. So people do want to have a good reputation. A company wants to have, and so you want to make sure testing is the only way. Everyone tests, but the only difference is whether you test it manually every time, repeatedly, again and again, this is if you do the same thing, or whether you can automate it. So it's really important to see what parts of your application you can automate, and of course, as early as possible. If you start automating, it's easy. It's part of the flow. People don't have even the developers, when you later on, if they never written code, they don't really want to do that. It seems like a pain, but actually, after you get used to it, it becomes part of your life. You're saying, what am I doing? I'm not going to release this without testing this, and I can either test it manually again and again every time before I ship something, or I can write some code and wait a second, this is what I do best, writing code. So So I
Yeah, it
see
can be
more.
overwhelming too. Like if you look at it and you've never seen like test-driven development or any type of process with this, you can look at it and say, well, do I do unit tests? Do I do functional tests? Do I do acceptance tests, integration? Oh my God, I don't know what I should choose, how much I should choose of each, if I should choose anything. Maybe we just shouldn't test at all. Maybe we should just manually test everything.
So there's the testing pyramids. People can usually have a lot of unit tests. That means that a company usually had a lot of unit tests, um, much fewer integration tests, and very few end-to-end testing. And so most companies have a lot of unit tests because it's easier to write, easy to get started. Because you have a unit test, let's create a new count. So your test probably starts at before each test. My account equals to a new account, and it's very easy to get started. It's usually the same language. The instantiation is so simple. You wrote the code, so you know it. That's why it's so simple about starting with unit tests. And and end to end is end to end is a bit tricky. Why is end to end tricky? First of all, it's not now always in the same language. Usually, if you do front end, for years, the most for well, everyone uses Selenium. We'll talk about it in a second. But it was the Selenium was reading and the documentation for Java was you had the best documentation, the Java binding. So if you're a front end guy, I want to write in JavaScript. So I have to write out something now in Java, different editor, the IDE. Tests are much longer. Everyone keeps saying when you talk about tests, you first do the setup, and then you test something, and then there's the teardown. So the setup is opening the calculator, and then we have the actions, the stimuli, when you create 1 plus 1, and then you validate that there's a 2, and then you close the browser. When you're talking about end-to-end testing with real browsers, now you get the pain of, wait a second, how do I start a browser? How do I start browser in plural? When I run tests, unit test is so fast usually. Even if you don't run it concurrently, it's gonna be over in 20 seconds. And end-to-end testing, even just getting the browser up, that's gonna take a few seconds. So usually you see with end-to-end testing, you see people don't check as perfect in the ideal world of checking one thing and then closing the browser down. Every test, usually in unit tests, you test something specific because you want to know when a test fails, it means this unit that broke and it broke on this functionality, and I know exactly what went wrong. And so end to end, because of the high the high price of starting a session and logging in, and so you see people testing not just a specific feature, but a whole user story, which has a few actions, and so when it breaks, you have the disadvantage of not knowing exactly what happened. Whose fault is it? Is it the front end? Is it something that database failure? You don't know exactly what happened, but it has the advantage that you checked huge amounts of coverage in a single test. So if you take Gmail, for example, you open it, you send yourself an email, and then you open it, something that would probably ideally would take a few minutes to write, and that will have like 30% coverage of all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, backend, front end, most of the code of Gmail in a single test. So but it's not that simple. The end-to-end testing is not that simple because you have the whole maintenance of getting your browsers up and running and concurrent, and your test has to be very isolated. If you want to run things concurrent, then you have to create for each test that you start running. Maybe we should create a new user because we want to have it isolated. We want to run 2 tests in the same time, accessing some data. So we want to make sure that they're not interrupting each other. So this isolation thing is very important. But if you're writing, if your application is a web application that is multi-tenant, you have different users, and for security-wise, they don't have access to each other. Then you probably can write tests, which are very isolated as well. But it's the getting used to and the tooling which really help, which should help you, because the basic is when you start coding, you get nothing. You get a browser and that's it. What I mean by that is everyone's using Selenium. Selenium is de facto standard right now for writing tests. Selenium is an open source project for writing end-to-end testing. It started more than a decade ago, and now we have there used to be Selenium, there used to be WebDriver, and they merged the two projects, and you now you'll see it as probably Selenium 2 or WebDriver or Selenium WebDriver, and the great thing about Selenium is that it became a standard. The API of automating, of driving a browser became a standard. It's very low level. The API just has open a browser, find a button, find some elements, and you can click it. You can move the mouse and get a screenshot or get the content of an element. That's it. It doesn't help you do the visual validations. It doesn't help you with a lot of stuff. It's a very low level, but this is the nice thing that it's a standard, and all the toolings, all the ecosystem out there, they can work with Selenium. So if you work with Selenium, you know that if you want to have now a browser in the cloud, have some I don't know, maybe open source or commercial tool that knows how to open a browser for you. The nice thing is that they work with the Selenium API, and you can integrate it in a click.
Yeah, I got to work with Selenium a little bit, and I found that writing tests for that, the QAs, they came up with an interesting system where they had a tool that automated like creating these, so that they would just do a flow like click here, then this does this, then this does this, and they would all do it manually, and then that would save that test. If for some reason the data changed, it was easy to just create a new test. They could throw that test away and it was fine. Because a lot of these can be brittle. Like we were using a WebDriver or Selenium, or whatever you want to call it, right? We were using that, and Nokogiri, which is a gem for Ruby to parse. It's used to parse XML, but we were using it to parse HTML. And so it was brittle at times. People would change IDs or class names, and that would just blow up everything you have. You move content, and adding like a CMS, not having the same data in the same environments. These all cause lots of problems. You don't think about it until it actually happens. So if you have a really good QA team that can set up these environments, or DevOps team to work with them, that's really helpful, because otherwise you could be down for like a while.
Yeah. So flaky test, brittle test, this is the biggest pain in end-to-end testing. This happens because you actually reverse engineer. What happens when you have a test, an end-to-end test, is you have the screen and you have to find an element and click it. So how do you find that specific element? For example, the 1 and the plus and the 1 and the equals. So how do you find them? So usually people don't add their own specific debugging symbols. So you want to say, okay, maybe I should use an ID or class, some property. The Selenium API says, give me either a class, ID, CSS locator, or an XPath, which are all basically very similar. It means use some property to find that element. And that's brittle, because if you don't have a contract, then this and someone changes the CSS, someone comes CSS class, then the test will break, because the test can't find it on screen right now, because he's looking for some ID, but you renamed it. So this is the biggest challenge currently in end-to-end testing. So maybe I should do a plugin right here. Not sure if you knew, but this is actually what I'm trying to solve right now. What we're doing is we're having a different type of locators. This is what my task at the Selenium conference last month was about, is that finding an element by just one attribute is hard. And and it's brittle. That's why things keep breaking. So what if you have hundreds of different attributes that's something that a machine would know automatically? It looks at your Spring and your implementation, and he sees there's probably hundreds of different attributes, not just the ID and the class, the content, and different lots of properties that you can later find a specific element. So what if you use all of them and doing something like a statistical analysis and find out the specific element using not just one locator, just one property, using all of them. So if you change one of them, you can still find that element the next day. And you can learn that, oh, wait a second, this ID is volatile because this ID it keeps changing every 2 weeks because it's random generated, like a GUI generated. So this is what you mentioned for the QA. There's a tooling. It's called record playback. It's it means that you once recorded as a human records the flow, and that creates a test for that scenario. And the challenge was that writing those kind of tests usually were extra for Agile. Why? Because a computer trying to find out if the user clicked the button, choosing the specific property, not a developer, but the computer has to choose one property. He can't know. He looks at, they see so many properties. So, oh, I have to pick one. So maybe I should take the ID because it's the most unique. But no, ID can be random generated. It can be changed. So this is a hard challenge when you point an element and finding it again and again tomorrow and a week from now and a month, because people keeps changing the API. You won't need that. It won't happen if your API was very like statically typed. I can tell you something we did at Wix. I used to work at a company called Wix. I did the front end. And we didn't have Ember and the like, the MVC frameworks, Angular and React and whatever. So we built our own framework that was way few years back. And what we did was actually we made a contract between the logic and the template. So the template has to have some property which you can statically check. For example, a header must have has to have a property named title and a header, and that helped us. It was originally part of the MVC, so you can use one controller, run logic with different UIs, and you know that they would work because you had some contract between the different parts that the logic demanded and different templates. So you could use lots of different templates, but you have something that verifies it statically that that template has those parts. And the good thing that came out of it was that the test never broke, because we wrote the test. We knew that those properties would never break because they were even checked at static time before deploying. And we knew that we can find those elements using those properties. So
did you remove those though at runtime, like at build time? Sorry, so that you're not polluting the code, like when it gets into runtime. So this way you're not tying your Selenium to those elements in some way.
So it's not. It wasn't removed because it was part of the MVC. We didn't do that for the testing wise.
Okay. So it wasn't like a Selenium-specific attribute that you added or something you made up.
We added.
It was like, we're always going to check for this.
Yeah, but Wix. But over the years, Wix moved and used just a few other frameworks, moved to React and Angular, and so you see that this practice was actually almost forgotten because you used that was specifically when you build your own MVC framework. That's the advantage. You can do whatever you want, and you can have things that help you. And currently in MVC frameworks right now, there's no emphasis on end-to-end testing. those kind of features are I didn't see them in anyone. There's a lot of tooling. There's a lot of things that help you with the current MVC framework for writing unit tests. But for end-to-end testing, it's still there's not a lot of tooling that helps you write end-to-end testing and simplifies and helping you that they won't be brittle and won't break them often. So
Yeah,
Well,
it's
it's
hard.
hard, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's the end result of it being an incredibly difficult problem to solve. I mean, everyone has their own sort of homegrown solution internally in so many teams when it comes to end-to-end testing. You know, like to some extent, I think we take it for granted that it is fairly easy now to test a lot of the things that we want to test because we have the tooling to do so. But then you go internally on a team that's writing product X that doesn't have any testing frameworks, who's never written any tests, and you know, they've got dedicated QA, but even QA basically has their own tests, and then you try to mash them into one thing that gives you an end-to-end result in an attempt to make sure that you don't ship bugs into prod. Because at the end of the day, I mean, that's all what we're really trying to do, right? We're trying to, you know, better, ship better product as quickly as we can. But end-to-end testing, like if someone finds a bulletproof solution for that, I would very much like to hear it on any given day of the week.
I'll send you an invite. No, it's okay. Don't worry. I got the hint.
You send me an invite because I'm going to want to play with this because it is a very hard problem, and I think it's difficult to get. You know, developers have a tendency to be stuck in their ways sometimes, right? I mean, there are some developers that I know that will never write a test case to save their life because they came up in the span of waterfall, and I have dedicated engineers that write my tests and yada yada yada, and that must be nice, but some of us don't. So you end up in a different sort of scenario of, well, how am I going to make sure this ships? And I mean, it is still hard, right? I mean, you end up with engineers who are constrained on time, who are, you know, they you know, there's a lot of people who claim they're agile environments. They're not so agile, right? Right?
Agile doesn't even
name.
exist. It's just a name that people give to something, some processes that they do.
So
Right.
that way I had now there's a Oracle convention here in San Francisco. So I had with the author Seb Rose, amazing dude in the testing world. We had a discussion on whether record playback tools are good or bad. Is it evil or not? So on one hand, they let you write tests quickly. You can write, as I said, tests that can have 20 to 30% coverage within an hour. That says, wow, I can have 30%. I can show value to my boss in an hour and have start writing end-to-end testing. Most of them, of course, you can have the ability to write code as well, but you can record much of the action, much of the clicks in a second. And there's a bad thing about it. Inherently, when you talk about record playback, you talk about when someone has already the implementation, and you're talking specifically about an implementation. So it can hurt, and inherently you say, oh, it's probably very fragile because you recorded it from some specific implementation. And so what happens when you change that? So first of all, me and Seb, we both want to recommend. I hope Seb's not hitting me right now and say, oh, what did you say? So the first thing is always separate between the business logic, which that could be when the user logs in. That could be either plain English in tools like Cucumber, that actually or just writing methods that has very high level as account. An account has a method called login. This is not implementation. This is just your business logic. This is the terms that a QA would use. So either writing code, we used that at Wix a few years back when we started to be doing the testing and continuous deployment. I wrote the entire API of the entire Wix over the weekend and gave them an interface, all the QAs, and told them, here you have an interface for classes for the entire Wix system, gallery go next image, go previous image, and you can now do it concurrently. You write the testing right now using the interface. Give me guys and the other devs a week, and we'll implement those interfaces. And after a week, we met, and they had the test ready because they were writing in plain English, account login, account open gallery, and we implemented that specific behaviors. So usually you have it's called the V of design. It's V because you start with requirements and you go down and you do the requirements. You have the design, and when you go down, you get to the bottom point. It's actually you start implementing your units, and then you will go up. You can write back up. It says do the unit test and do the integration test, and you go up to the right point of the V. Is the end-to-end testing. And what we're saying actually was, wait a second, once you have the requirements, this is TDD as well, so once you have the requirements, you're at the top level of the V, the left top level, you can start writing your test right now. You can do it in parallel. There's no reason why not writing tests while you write the code. It doesn't have to be afterwards. Record playbacks tools help you saying, okay, once you already have a huge amount of code and your application is already huge and you want to start testing it, you want to speed those writing the test and having those tests instead of writing them now for a few months. You want to have them written really, really quick. And as I said, usually the disadvantage is that they're brittle, and that's what we're working on. If machines now can help you, machine learning can help you make the test less brittle, that would be awesome. So you get both benefits.
Yeah, but with something like a record playback, like for Selenium, I actually prefer that if you're going to use Selenium to do this kind of test, because it takes literally less than 5 minutes to build one of these tests. So let's say it fails, and you look at it, and you're like, oh, these 3 failed. Why did they fail? And you figure it out, and you're like, then it takes another 5 minutes to get rid of that one and replace it with a new one. Whereas, I had to write a Cucumber suite, and regex validations are my favorite thing to do now. So basically, what Cucumber does is it has the reason that you have like human readable tests that you can write is because it basically looks for certain keywords and does some functionality. So maintaining something like this, you're building this giant regex parser that will say, given this, I'm going to do this. And it's beautiful if you have buy-in on the product side, because then they can write your tests, right? And that's great for that high level. Then you just say, okay, you write the test for this, and then they could run it themselves and test it that way. You can put it in the suite, and it's done, but you still have to maintain that. So the maintenance cost versus the buy-in, like if you don't have anybody using this except developers, that's a really hard sell, because there is overhead to maintaining something like that. The Selenium tests I found were really nice, though, where you just do the playback record ones, not the ones that we were building in Rails or anything like that, or even on JavaScript stuff.
Well, the Cucumber has the only advantage is if you want to not just have it for tests. Well, I'll start with it's even nicer for tests. The only thing that I like about it is that it forces you to separate between the two implementation and business logic. So I would say even if you don't use Cucumber, actually another recommendation. I would say always have some separate between your tests. Your test should not have Selenium code. It should only have business code. Create a new account, create a new user, start logging in, and the implementation should be in your what's called page object. So that's where the implementation should be. And so the Cucumber, the only thing about it, which is what I like about it, is that it forces you. It says write the business logic in English and the implementation using code. There's a disadvantage, of course. you can't reuse a lot, because when you're using when I'm logged in, and then you use the the code, the JavaScript or Ruby in Cucumber. If you use the code there, you cannot use now a different when I log in or when I'm at a different.
Right.
It's one level, so it's not exactly a reusable, a completely reusable. And because they saw people, they actually had it in one, and the first version, and they removed it because they saw that people don't know how to do a lot of good reuse, because the people that wrote those the spec side were not developers. So they try to say, okay, write in English so I can have the product manager write it, but product managers are not developers. That's why developers it's great if developers write code, because they know how to do proper reuse and proper architecture. So this is what developers do great. That's why I love them. I just
Sorry,
want
go
to say
ahead.
one more thing is that the only advantage of Cucumber is if you want to have some product guy help you out with the specs and have the specs in your Git repository, your version control, you want to have it aligned with your code. That's a nice thing to have, and that's the advantage of Cucumber, not just the separation of the business code and it's having them aligned and having someone from the product involved with the versioning. So I guess that would be my the great bonus I see in Cucumber.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad product. I just think that you need to really consider your organization and how you're using it before you invest in it, for sure.
So I do think it's a bad. No, I don't think it's a bad product, but Mom always said, before you say something bad about a product, first of all you have to say a lot of good things. So there's it gives you as you said, it gives you the possibility to separate, and gives you the spec inside. It's not easy to debug, so there's a lot of disadvantages there as well. But so this is what we got right now, and this is one of the options.
And you talked before about continuous integration and continuous deployment. We didn't really go through what those are, but one of the things I found is, when you're building tests, when you first start with TDD, let's say you have a new project, right? And you're like, oh, I'm so excited, and you have 100% coverage, and you're running your test suite, and it takes 10 seconds, and then you push it up, and then integration runs, and it's 20 seconds, and then it goes into staging, and it's about 25 seconds. And then as you start building more of your app and more of your app, you start getting thousands of these tests. And so your suite is now running at 45 minutes locally and an hour in integration. And when you're trying to do continuous deployment, this can be a problem. Mm-hmm. So how do we solve that? How do we work around that and better ourselves in this respect?
So the nice thing is that if you take that 45 minutes, if you have instead of running it on one browser and running it on 45 browsers, that means you're going to run the entire test suite in a minute. So that, of course, there's a cost. There's two kind of costs. First of all, there's money, because you want to set up running 45 different browsers right now. And technically, there you have some solutions that help you. For example, Selenium Grid. That's the open source project that helps you with getting the browser up and running, closing them. It used to be so complicated. It's now much better since Docker moved into our lives. So getting a browser open, it takes now half a second instead of 10 seconds. That's one thing. But it means that there's one thing that the developer should keep in mind when he starts the test, when he writing the test, the initial project, which is you have to write them in an isolated way. I see so many people writing tests that are not isolated, that they assume the first test has finished successfully, and for example, the first test create the user, the second test assume there's a user by that name and adds adds something to the cart, and the next test. You can't have that. You have to have every test isolated, completely isolated, can run on its own. You can run it in parallel. That's the most important thing. And I guess we'll see more and more. I don't see it right now. It's something that I really would like to see. That you can run the same test in different kind of granularity. For example, imagine you have a front-end test that takes the one plus one, the calculator, and presses equals, and you see a 2. So in Google's case, it sends an HTTP request back to the servers, right? And that takes time, and then, I don't know, if it goes to the database or just calculates on the fly and gives you a result. So how about if you only change something in the UI, for example, some CSS or some JavaScript, how about we mock everything that the network had, so the test would be probably about 1,000 times faster, and maybe have the sanity test run it. If I only change the front end, only run the front end side and mock everything else. So I imagine in the future, I don't know, 1 year, 2 years into the future, don't see the Back to the Future now. Now people will have the same test, running it in different kind of reality, and as a sanity before I commit, I want to run those tests. I'm not going to wait 5 hours. I'm going to write 1 minute, and I see that everything passes. I'll commit. I'll probably push. Later, maybe run it again, but maybe at the nightly build, we'll run everything end to end. So what I mean by the in-depth is that you can run the same test you can mark different stuff by giving some properties.
And we've had it too with, like you said, network requests where like you run it locally and people will stub some source for an image or something in there, and or maybe you're actually calling the image from your server, and then when you put it up into integration, it blows up. Why does it blow up? Well, there's some security problems on there. So you run into all these things that don't relate to your code, and it's nice to have like some way to kind of not focus on that and just not worry about it.
Yeah, and especially it would be easier to debug if I can isolate different parts and now run it without the network, the original network. You can see where the bug is. So debug. I'm not TDD. I'm DOP. I'm debug-oriented programming. For me, the best way is write an application that it's easier to debug it. Once you have a bug or a failed test, that you can find out in seconds what causes the error. That's the most important thing here. The time of debugging. People think about the time of reuse and time of writing applications, but the time of debugging is it's huge. So.
As far as like unit testing for JavaScript and end-to-end testing, do you have any particular favorites or flavors that you prefer for different frameworks or just in general? Because there's things like QUnit, which is just very basic, which was built for jQuery, right? But you can use it for basic assertions, but it doesn't have stuff like mocks and stubs and spies and things like that Jasmine would have.
So you have
you can use sign-on for something like that with it.
Mm-hmm. So Sinon, for example, has a great framework for completing those validations and verifications that you mentioned. So you can use it with every library. All of the libraries actually work with each other. So you can use QUnit with Sinon, and there's a lot of different Mocha. So the nice thing about Jasmine that I really like is that it's simple. Simple to get started. It has everything. You don't have to start using different frameworks, and not just different frameworks. I think Sinon has a distinguish. There's a distinguish between spies and marks and few other things. And I find it that could be intimidating for new developers, and Jasmine just took the best parts and added it together and says, okay, we need to replace this method call, and that could be, we can either just make the validation that it was invoked or return a different value. So the Jasmine API is what I mean is super simple to use, super easy to get started. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, I love it. Is like describe this, and then inside of there you have, it should whatever, it should do this, and it's
Yeah.
full featured too, so it's nice. I like it, and the Angular testing is built off of the same type of API like Jasmine, if not Jasmine itself. I'm not sure.
And regarding end-to-end, I see a lot of people working with against the API of Phantom.js, because Phantom.js is a headless browser, so the usage is really quick. And I usually tell them, first of all, always use with the Selenium API, which is a standard. There's a wrapper for, even if you want to use Phantom.js, there's a wrapper for Selenium API. We use Phantom. So you can run it in Selenium code, and when you want to change, instead of using Phantom, you want to use a different browser, a different headless, or Casper, or real browsers, then you can, the change is like a one-liner, and you don't have to rewrite your code. So I would definitely use anything that you write underneath should be Selenium compliant. And there's another thing that I usually tell people about Phantom is that they use it's WebKit. It's not even a Blink. People always think it's Chrome, headless Chrome, but it's not. It's not that updated. So there's a lot of things, especially Flexbox and new stuff, that aren't rendered correctly. And so I would definitely use the Selenium API. And if speed is such of an essence, I might even use some run, for example, Chrome. I would probably reuse it on virtual buffers. You can run it without the actual pixels, and that has saved some performance. That would help with performance. But Phantom,
Yeah.
I would think twice before using Phantom. It depends what you're testing, but as I
Yeah,
said,
I was
it's
gonna say.
CSS. So it depends. If you want to use something quickly and just look at the DOM, that's one thing. If you want to check the CSS, how it's rendered, for example, visual validations, be warned. That's it.
It's all trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
So whatever you want to test, the best tool for the best job, you'll have a little overhead, a little more overhead if you run a standard browser, but if you run Phantom, you'll definitely get that speed, but you'll lose some of that DOM interaction for sure. I mean,
And
also too, when we talked about spies and stubs and mocks, we could probably go on for another hour talking about those because people definitely have opinions about mocking and stubbing. So
It's
if
like
people
buying a
want to,
car.
yeah, it's some people have just told me I don't do that. I'm gonna just assert things and I don't need all that stuff. I just need the basics, and that's okay. Whatever works for the team. I think we've gone way over time, and I think that's the nature of a testing episode. So I apologize, Oren. Thank you for being a good sport and staying on with us. I really appreciate it.
all right, welcome. I had a great time.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Sorry, Justin, I kind of talked over you a bit. Didn't give you much chance to talk too much.
That's okay. No one needs to hear me talk.
Yeah, that's true.
So my question. I see how it is.
Stole all your questions. That's right.
Jeez. It's fine.
So if people want to talk to you about testing, to get in touch with you, what's your Twitter handle? How can people find you?
It's Shexman, Shexman. Just use Oren Rubin, and so everything, either Twitter, LinkedIn, everything's cool. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been episode 69. 69, dude! For all you 80s movies people out there, that was from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I've dated myself now.
It's a great film.
Oh, it's fantastic. A work of art. Alex Winter, Keanu Reeves, can't go wrong.
Call for proposals is done and registration is open. And O'Reilly Fluent Conf is back in just a few months. Fluent, the web platform conference, will be held in San Francisco, California. on March 7th through 10th, 2016. So get practical training in JavaScript, HTML5, CSS, and the latest web development technologies and frameworks. The Web Platform Podcast listeners receive a 20% discount when registering for the conference. So make sure you use the promotional code PCWPP20 to receive your discount. You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at @TheWebPlatform or on Google Plus and YouTube at +TheWebPlatform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.